is definitely an animal. And in this case, a coral colony is several replicated, well, thousands of replicated cells, all of them being genetic clones, and that makes up a colony. So yes, for sure, when you look at one coral, it is thousands of coral polyps that are all communicating and working together as one.
The reefs in Bonaire have been declining in at least cover and health probably the 70s or 80s. I mean, we have data on that. And of course, worldwide, it's the same trend. So when you lose, let's say, a certain kind of coral, you also lose all sorts of other organisms that are kind of associated with that coral. And we're having that with the rainforest as well. As you level them, there's some parts of certain rainforests that are really unique, and you have endemic species and things like that. With the reef, it's not quite as much because you don't have as much endemism. You don't, because of the larval stage is so broad. But we do get that. So they're very productive, just like rainforests. But once they're gone, they don't bounce back. So like a prairie could come back, but a reef or a rainforest doesn't, because it's just so diverse, it's specialized.
Well, for us here in Bonaire, everything I think relies on the reef. Our tourism industry relies heavily on the reef. Even if you're not a diver, snorkelers and swimmers enjoy a reef system. The fish rely on the reef, especially the juveniles. In the shallow waters, for sure, the juveniles need shallow water territory because they're not necessarily big enough and ready enough to take on the deeper waters due to predators that are there that want to eat them. So the shallow water population of corals is really essential for juvenile development of the fishes. Fishermen rely on the reef for their industry, to be able to provide food for their families, as well as food for sale. Everything involves the reef, one way or the other. It all does come back to the ocean, for sure. The first signs of bleached coral are basically the only sign that you see, which is whiteness, where essentially the corals, there's a microalgae that lives within the coral's tissue, and that microalgae leaves for many reasons, and it leaves the coral in a state of basically a clear coloring. So the color from a coral comes from this microalgae, and when microalgae leaves, it essentially leaves the coral looking bleached. There are many causes that are affecting our corals and making them bleach. A lot of them have to do with temperature change, so environmental issues. It can also be due to runoff, sediment getting in the water, which makes it so that the microalgae has a difficult time doing its process of photosynthesis. But mainly temperature changes is the biggest cause here. Either they rise too high or even they go too low.
Because of the carbon in the atmosphere, it's causing more hydrogen ions, I guess, if we want to simplify it. But what we do know is it's making it a little bit more less basic. The more basic and the more warm the water is, it's actually can calcify faster, the corals. Not just corals, but a lot of planktonic species, crustaceans, all those animals, they're able to calcify from the minerals in the water. And as the water becomes less basic, it's becoming more difficult to calcify. So I don't know how fast that's happening, but the idea is it's happening too fast for corals to be able to keep up with that. So they're actually not keeping up. And also with with sea level rise. If their calcification is slowing down and the sea level's rising, they're not going to be able to keep up with that sea level rise. They're going to end up in the darker zones, and they're not going to be able to photosynthesize and grow, and that's going to even slow down the calcification more. So that's a big problem. That's one of the climate change problems that I'm worried about. Unless we get a handle on climate change, I don't see a bright future for coral reefs. I mean, we can do what we can at the local level to hopefully give reefs a fighting chance. But if at the global level, the system level, atmospheric level, we don't figure this out, I don't think there's much hope. I mean, we've seen a change here in Bonaire, and it's very exciting, but I'm realistic. And if we don't stop growing our world population, if we don't find alternatives, like immediately to carbon, burning, then I really don't see them. I mean, we will have reefs. They just won't be like the reefs of the past. And maybe in, 20 million years, we'll have more when people have gone extinct. But yeah.
Reef Renewal is a project that was started with the intent to rebuild the shallow water populations of corals, the endangered species, focusing on staghorn as well as elkhorn corals. And then recently it has grown in its project in the sense that it is also furthering its goals into larva propagation as well as boulder style corals, which is a slightly different nursery and fragmentation process.
And we've seen an increase in coral cover in the last two rounds, increase in coral recruits, a decrease in macroalgae, a decrease in perf algal height. Some of the fish, it's not as obvious because the data is just not robust enough. But all of these trends are showing that we're doing something right. And I think it coincides. If it was my guess, we don't have data yet. We installed a sewage treatment plant in 2015, and it's now processing maybe 20% of the sewage that went directly into the reef. So I think that has certainly helped improve our water quality, which in turn I think has helped drive some of these trends.
What we can do to help our coral reefs is, one, become very aware that they need our help. A lot of the world doesn't realize what is underwater and therefore not visible to see. It becomes a problem for later, rather than what should be considered a problem for now. We need to spread awareness. We need to spread more than just the beautiful creatures in the ocean, but also awareness of the backdrop of the ocean, which is the reef system. We will lose these creatures that we love, the dolphins, the turtles, the seahorses, all of these we will lose over time if we lose the habitat that they live on or that they need in themselves to live with. So corals need to be paid attention to. There's a lot going on in the media and that helps, but divers need to be aware. The general public needs to be aware that everything that we put into the ocean or pump into the ocean or do with the ocean is having an effect on something that they can't see, but those of us who dive and snorkel are witnessing, and that's the decline of the corals.
stand beneath your song, your moon. The night would pass, my darling, soon. The wild dogs bark, but wait, stand still. They'll chase you down, but wouldn't kill. The grey seems grayer in your eyes, the bright shade of your bluest light. You say everything